how do you perceive the idea that you're always striving to get that knowledge you're always curious to know what is happening, for example, in the black hole, or what is happening in another, space phenomenon that you're interested in. But how do you deal with the idea that you might not be able to reach that knowledge? Because for me personally, once I got fascinated with with astrophysics and space and so on, it's almost devastating for me to know that I might never receive the answers that I want to receive. So I'm dying to see, to know what is happening in space, and to know, how big we are, and, to know all the things that I don't even know that I don't know, it doesn't make sense. So how is your brain perceiving that? Considering all the knowledge that you have, and that this is pretty much a life mission that you might not be able to go to, to get as an end goal to.
Well, if you're asking, how do I deal with, or how do I process the fact that there will definitely be incredible discoveries made after I'm dead, mm-hmm. and I might not be able to understand. I probably will not be alive when certain things are discovered. Maybe that's what you're asking.
This as well, and just in general, how do you find motivation to work towards something that you might not be able to understand? Yeah.
Oh, so you mean, so for example, how do you, how do I deal with the notion that, we do a lot of science, but that science doesn't necessarily guarantee a discovery or an answer to the question?
Yeah, this as well. In general, for example, you're dying to know what's inside in a black hole, and you're working towards that. But, you know that you might never, understand that. And I'm just interested how this notion affects your motivation and your perceptions and, your general involvement into this process.
I don't know. I think it's kind of a mindset thing, to be honest. It's more, if I understand you correctly, if I understand your question correctly, it's more, we do the kind of research that we do because, again, science is a process. Mm-hmm. It's not actually a list of facts. It's not a list of answers, right? Mm-hmm. And so even though I said that it's the best method that we humans have for determining truth from falsehood, and, coming up with the current best understanding of the universe, which again is the stuff that we refer to as truth, scientific mm-hmm. truth. But of course, that truth is always malleable, right? It's always changeable. It's always updatable, right? That's the other huge difference between science, the scientific way of looking at the world, and, other dogmatic ways of looking at the world. Science is always subject to scientific knowledge is always subject to update. Right. So for example, what we have here one of the things that we study at the Large Hadron Collider and many other facilities around the globe is this thing called the Standard Model of Particle Physics. This is capital S, capital M. It's a really fantastic, mathematical model that if you know some fairly straightforward math, you can kind of turn the crank, and this model will predict specific things that you should see in particle collision experiments if you perform them. And they're basically all been found. And the Higgs boson was the last predicted discovery of this thing. So it's a very successful model of the universe. But we know for a fact that it has to be incomplete because it does not explain. It really explains well, basically everything around you that you interact with all day long, the kind of you and me matter and, stars and planets and things like that. But that stuff only accounts for about 5% of the stuff budget of the universe. So there's 95% of the universe that we do not understand what it's made of right now. And so this standard model, quote unquote, we know it's incomplete. It's great. For all its successes, we know that it must be incomplete. It doesn't contain gravity, for example. We know gravity exists. It contains 3 of the 4 forces of nature, but not gravity. Mm-hmm. We also know that it doesn't contain dark matter. Dark matter is, we know for a fact that some phenomenon we refer to as dark matter exists because we see its effects on the cosmos due to gravity, but we have no idea what this particle is, if it is a particle. We've been looking for it for a very long time. So we know that the standard model has to be it's like this really great box that predicts things right here, but we know that it has to be extended at some point. And so these kinds of, extensions are a lot of the things that we go to, we look for all the time. And but this model that we have, right? If someone came along, so some people from an outside might think, oh, this is a very, it's like, oh, you believe in this model. Again, no, we don't believe in this model. It's just the current best description that we have. And if someone came along, in fact, with a completely different model that had nothing to do with this, notion of quantum fields and particles and things, if they came around with a new model that explained the same set of phenomena that the standard model did, plus it also explained these other things, it might take some time, but this one would win. This would take over and the other one would be abandoned. I would happily abandon the standard model if somebody else came up with another thing. So again, we're not emotionally invested in these things. Science is a process by which we ask and answer questions about the universe. And so, the type of research that we do here and a lot of science around the globe is done with the sense that we are all part of this process of inquiry. And, every paper that we publish, and in fact, the vast majority of the papers that we publish here at CERN, I currently work on an experiment called Atlas, one of the two experiments, these enormous experiments of the Large Hadron Collider that discovered the Higgs boson particle. And Atlas still runs now, and it's going to run for 20 more years, taking data with the Large Hadron Collider. And we publish papers all the time, and the vast majority of these papers, they say, if you look at them from one perspective, they are actually saying, we did not discover a new particle, frowny face, right? That's what they're saying from one perspective. From a different perspective, what that paper is saying is, we looked for the first time ever, the first time in human history, we looked in this corner, this little subset of our huge data set to see if there was a new discovery there, because we didn't know, and we can confirm that there is no discovery there. So that's a huge success. All the papers that we publish are enormous successes for the scientific method, because they're new information about the universe that we did not have before. It's not up to us where the new discovery can be hiding. It's, in fact, so this is the sort of long version of answering your question. I guess the short version would be to say that, in fact, my job is not to make new discoveries. That is not my job. My job is not to try to make new discoveries. My job is to rule out all the possible places in our data set where a new discovery could be hiding. And that's it takes a subtle shift of what your mindset is, right? And so from that perspective, we're more like cartographers. We're more like, I'm more like a map maker than anything. And so, again, we have this enormous data set, this collision data that comes in. We take a snapshot of all the stuff that flies out from the collision, and then we write all this collision data to disk, and then we analyze it afterwards, looking for things like dark matter. And it's a huge, multifaceted data set, and there's thousands of different, completely separate places within the data where you can look for new discoveries. And so that's what we do. And once you understand that that's the actual name of the game, maybe as a university student, you got to the classes and you're like, oh, wow, people work at CERN. Wow, they could discover a new particle. I'm going to get into that so I can discover dark matter. Unfortunately, that's not the right mindset. I mean, it's great. And I think that's nice that people have that same kind of attitude. And of course, I'm sure I went through that same time period as well, or that period where I had the same kind of attitude. But once you start to get into the research itself, you realize that doing science is its own reward. Like, it actually doesn't matter if you discover something or not. Maybe it matters for, I don't know, funding bodies, or, if you want to look cool for your friends because you have a Nobel Prize and they don't, it's like, okay, that's great. But I mean, keep in mind that, these kinds of totems, these sort of like symbols of success in science that we hold up, they're actually kind of antiquated, and we probably shouldn't focus on them too much. Like, I've said this many times, abolish the Nobel Prize, because it does a disservice to our field and the fields of the scientific, the scientific method, the scientific inquiry in general, because it still sort of underscores this notion that science progresses by normally a lone white male going, Eureka, I've changed everything myself. It's like, that's not how science works. We know that's not how science works. It's a collaborative process. It's collective. It takes what came before it and it builds upon it. So every discovery that happens in science relies upon the community of people that were supporting the conditions that led to that discovery. And it also relies upon all the people that came in the past to lay the groundwork for that discovery, even, and sometimes especially if the previous generations published results that were reporting no new discovery. Those can be just as inspiring as the we discovered something new papers. So, if that's, again, this is the long version. I do this a lot. The long version of answering the question is that, you kind of have to change your mindset. You do have your mindset changed as a scientist once you go through, especially grad school. You're like, okay, I sort of had it wrong in my head. It's like, you don't get into science to discover something. You get into science because science is amazing. It is its own reward. It's such a joy and a treat to be able to do science, to go through the hard work of the coding and the programming and the working with students and, trying to find, I don't have to do this a lot myself, but trying to find funding for your projects. This is the way the sausage is made. And the joy comes from the day-to-day recognition that I have had, even for a small amount of time and on a cosmic scale, all of our lifetimes are complete negligible blip on the cosmic time scale. I have had the grand good fortune to have a few years, of being able to participate in this wheel of science, this wonderful wheel of scientific inquiry. So I don't know if that answers your question, but this is the way that I think about it. It takes more of a mindset shift, right? It's not so much because it's like, oh no, I didn't discover something. My career is a failure. Nobody really feels that, at least when you're a scientist, a working scientist.
I think it's a beautiful way to, it's a beautiful idea because it really emphasizes the significance of the process rather than the strive for end result, which I think it's a great way in general to approach life in general, I guess.